for those that want dramatic reformed education, what we have right now is going to ultimately lead to that. Is that what we have right now in law is disruptive. It's kind of creative destruction, if you will. It's open enrollment. So for the kids that live in the districts, they essentially can go just about anywhere. And so one way or the other, if nothing happens, you're going to get choice. You're certainly going to get choice for all those kids. And you know, it's no secret that the St. Louis public school system scored a 25 on the last test. So they're far below 60. And the board, DESE, has decided that they're going to look at a 3-year rolling average, but everyone fully expects that I think the number is something like 32,000 kids will then also have tremendous choice. Come, you know, each August the test results are released. So not for this 14-15 school year, but for the 15-16 school year, you'll have 30,000 kids that have tremendous choice. So that's kind of been, you know, those that want school reform, on some level, you know, that's, if we get nothing done, you're going to get school reform. Now I will say this though, I have contended in a lot of kind of private negotiations with particular DESE and then others in the establishment, they too have an operating philosophy or procedure. And what they'll do is if nothing happens, Normandy will go bankrupt. They will lapse Normandy and they will push it into other surrounding school districts. They'll do the same thing at Riverview Gardens next year. When it goes bankrupt, they'll take Riverview Gardens and they'll break it up. They know that's what happened with Wellston. That's how Normandy ended up being, that pushed them over the edge. That'll push other school districts over the edge. And then it'll be interesting to see what they do with St. Louis. I think this is this battle between, do we give on any reform, or do we attempt to maintain existing school districts? And like I said, the reformers, we're satisfied with what's in front of the governor today. But if they take away the private school option, then maybe it's just okay to have this open enrollment continue on and this creative destruction continue. And then from DESE's point of view, they look at it as, well, it's only a problem for the next year or two. And then when St. Louis Public goes unaccredited, well, then we'll just wait for them to go bankrupt, and then so it's an interesting, back and forth. It is important to remember that St. Louis is not the favorite place of the vast majority of the state. And I live in St. Louis and Kansas City, and Kansas City gets treated much more favorably. There's a much more general impression of Kansas City is very different than the impression of St. Louis. And I would say that the establishment that is education is not centered. They're centered kind of maybe center of the state west. And so they're not all that concerned with how disruptive things might end up in St. Louis. I think what's going to happen is people are going to transfer to schools that are closer to the unaccredited school districts is what's going to happen. You know, that's there's a lot in this in the bill for the receiving school districts. I think it also is a way where the receiving school districts, and many of whom are in the voluntary transfer program now, some that aren't. I mean, it allows the receiving school districts to control the flow of children. There are some districts that, quite frankly, need the kids to remain economically viable, and then maybe over time we'll need them even more. So. No, I think that the net result would be is that those kids that now are busing out to Francis Howell and busing to Melville, at the end of the day, they're going to have to provide their own transportation, so they're more likely they're going to transfer to a lot closer school districts. The internet sales tax has been completely booted to the federal level, so until they come to a conclusion, I guess the Main Street Fairness Act is the act at the federal level. So the states that have pursued an internet sales tax have done through the streamlined sales tax process, which is actually a voluntary process. It doesn't generate, it generates millions of maybe 10 or 20 million at most. And so that was not pursued at all. I think that the operating procedure is, the federal government's they're going to resolve this first, and then we'll follow. And then the point he's making is that we actually have a use tax that nobody pays. So you all get a $2,000 exemption on your first $2,000 of internet purchases that you don't pay any taxes on. You're exempt, and then everything over $2,000, you're supposed to be submitting your own use tax liability. I think we had 150 people that actually filed a use tax last year. So
So nothing is.
So nothing. No. That's not. It's not going to happen. It's a way we do use tax in the state is. It's not very efficient at all, and the law is not. The answer is it's not going to happen. Now, it should happen, but it's not. And here's why. Much
You're in favor of it?
Oh, of course. But if we were starting from scratch, if I'm going to tax consumption or tax creation of wealth, I'm always going to tax consumption before I tax the creation of wealth. But the governor gets away with, and there's lots of stats out there, right? So the governor likes to say we're a low tax state, we're a low tax state. Well, we're a low tax state only by the metric of state tax revenue by population. Okay, so we have a big population, we have 6 million people, and he's looking just at that metric. So we've got an older state. Quite frankly, we have a poorer state. Missouri's one of the poorer states, and so by that metric, we're in the bottom 10 states in terms of state revenue divided by population. But the actual rates that we charge. So, for example, we were able to negotiate the transportation sales tax down to 0.75%. Had it gone on at 1%, Missouri, if you look at our combined state sales tax, which is 4.225, and local sales tax, right now we're 14th in the country, highest. If the 1% had gone on, we would have been the 6th highest combined state and local sales tax in the country. And as it is modified, we'd be the 9th highest state and local sales tax. Now, that number is in the 8s. Well, you all know you're here in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, Jackson County. On the other side, there are hundreds of transportation districts and community improvement districts. Our sales tax burden is in anywhere from mid-8s to 11% in some places in Jackson County now, before these initiatives go forward. So how do you replace the income tax with sales tax when the sales tax already is in the top 10 highest in the country? I mean, there are states that don't have income taxes that have lower combined state and local sales taxes than we do. And then with respect to, there's nothing about our income tax rates that are low. I mean, we're just not super high. We have a really strange system of our brackets have never been indexed for inflation. That was that's an amendment that I put on to the tax cut that did pass, that we actually would index our brackets. But so we're a high marginal we're an average marginal tax state. We're a high sales tax state, and the only place where we rank in the top 10 is in our business taxes, which doesn't surprise me because the businesses are the ones that that hire lobbyists, and they go and they get carve-outs for all these little business taxes, and that's the only place where we're in the top 10 with respect to the top 10 being good. Residents that moved to Florida, it's the businesses that have moved out, the businesses that expand in other states. We've got 2 relatively large urban suburban areas. We've had single party rule, and there's 1.3 million people. We've had single party rule for 30, 40 years, and we all see the population loss in the city and the county. I mean, there's all kinds of things to be concerned about. I mean, our fiscal ship is not sound. The foundation is not sound. And our majorities we're not pursuing reform. Reform is very difficult because you're taking something away from somebody and either redeploying it back somewhere else, or you're giving it back to taxpayers. And taking something away is very difficult for an elected official. Most people think it will not, and I know that the poll, and its polling, it's been in the low 50s consistently. It's as high as it could possibly get, which is not a good sign for a tax initiative. But the November cycle is a very interesting cycle. There's not a presidential, there's not a U.S. Senate. I think it's a 1 in a 16-year cycle or something, where it's a ultra low turnout cycle. And I know that the money behind the initiative will be $7-8 million. And the idea that it's a 10-year and a sunset, it's going to be a permanent tax. I mean, that's the operating philosophy is it's going to be permanent. And actually, there's this group called the Missouri Transportation Alliance. And you go to their website, and surprise, surprise, who's in the alliance? People that build roads, sell supply to roads, labor unions, and people whose businesses they benefit trucking companies by roads. And so I actually went to them from June of last year through session. My idea was simply to not cut taxes, to not raise taxes, to go to constitutional amendment change to the ballot that says we're going to redirect 1/8 of all sales and use taxes to roads. Permanent, make it a priority. It'd be about $400 or $500 million at its start, and then it would grow over time. And it wasn't. And the answer was it wasn't enough money. Okay, so at that time they were lobbying for $800 million. And the other one was really interesting, is that they wanted the LLC tax cut. Well, most of the people in MOTA, they're organized as LLCs. So not only did they want to raise Missourians' taxes, because their industry was going to spend it, they were going to have their taxes be cut while other people's taxes are being raised. So, to answer your question, everyone assures me they'll never pass, it'll never pass, it'll never pass. Missourians don't like tax increases. I hope that's right. But the reality is that we missed the opportunity to do what I just described. I mean, what I just described, if we had done that, the polling on that was, the MOTA didn't even need to poll it. They go, we don't need to poll that, that's high, that's in the 60s. Missourians will vote for that. They could have permanently found a $500 million funding source for roads, and it would have gone into effect immediately, and they could have just walked away, but that's not what they wanted. So. It's going to take a really strong executive leader. You're going to have a governor that's willing to come out and to govern against that monopoly. And until such time, the challenge you have in both the House and the Senate, this desire to have supermajority. Why do we need supermajorities? Well, on one level, we need them to pass anti-abortion measures. Okay, we need them to pass Second Amendment measures. So we want this supermajority, but to get the supermajority in the Senate, I think we had a half dozen candidates last year that were endorsed by AFL-CIO on the Republican side, which is extraordinary. And then there's a reform that I think we're going to have to make from outside the General Assembly. We have 163 House members and 34 senators. That ratio is the highest ratio in the country. It's not even close. That 163 House members, it should be half that. Minnesota is 70-40. So states with similar populations, that's kind of how it's aligned. A lot of states have it where, for every Senate seat, you might have 2 House seats. So what we've done with 163 seats is it's a very narrow group of 35,000 people, it's 10,000 votes. So one constituency can influence the outcome of the election. They have tremendous sway. And in most places around the country, that constituency is the teachers union and the administrators union. So when the administrators union and the teachers union, when they align, of the 6,000 or 7,000 votes you might need to be elected to the House, they might be able to bring the vast majority of those votes. So then you're in lockstep with them. Well, I think the people that I know that have chose to relocate or to stay here, more often than not, it falls along the lines of kind of quality of life. That we hear this, it's a great place to raise a family. Well, guess what? It's a great place to raise a family. We do have, it's interesting that we have the ability to be both a small and a large city in some respects, so you have some of the things, but specific to you as a small business owner.
And a job creator.
And a job creator, you have lots of choices other places. And so I don't think that there's a tremendous amount that's unique to St. Louis from the business side, but I do believe that the quality of life side. But the challenge you have, okay, so I spend my weekends in Kansas City, and when you cross Jackson County line and state line to go into Johnson County line and state line, what's going on in Johnson County is extraordinary. There's people say there's a border war. I'm like, there's no border war in Kansas City. It's been won. Johnson County won. Jackson County lost. I have laughed because one of my friends who's a Democrat from Independence, he works in Johnson County. Everybody in my neighborhood works in Johnson County. They all get up in the morning, they drive Johnson County. So again, Missouri's in trouble in that respect. And we know the St. Louis City and County, I said they're losing population. And so the path we've been on is, it feels good and it's comfortable. And we do allow for this quality of life that we all celebrate. But is it longer term economically viable? I mean, the best thing you can say about the state's fundamentals is that we have not made any tragic errors, meaning we have unfunded pensions, but they're not dramatically unfunded pensions. I mean, look, unfunded pensions are going to be a reason people leave states, and that's what people are going to leave California. They are leaving California because underfunded pensions. Illinois, it's a $100 billion unfunded pension liability, and the last 3 or 4 payments they made were all with borrowed money. So we haven't made any tragic mistakes, but we're not. I think we're kind of in a holding pattern. Only if Kansas picks up and takes the similar action, which I don't. Maybe they will, or maybe they won't. But I mean, it was really. What can you do? You know, what can you do? It's interesting because our economic incentive programs are entitlements, which means they're in law. You go apply for them, you get them. There's no discretion over them. The appropriators or the governor don't have discretion over it. Kansas, the appropriators, their tax credit programs are one decision at a time. And so the governor can decide that it's a good deal, or the appropriators can decide it's a good deal. And so Kansas' response to us is, well, we'll talk when you guys make your tax credit programs subject to appropriations, not when they're entitlements. Well, yeah, I mean, we're waiting for lawsuits to happen because this whole idea that the unaccredited district gets to pick one district to send transportation dollars to, well, that's not the law. They just kind of made that up. The DESE has made lots of rules and regulations that are counter to the law that they have not been challenged. So I can't speak to who might challenge them legally. Maria Chappelle-Nadal, in kind of the closing week when we voted on this bill, she gave a great speech. But one of the things she said was, okay, if not this governor, then what? Okay, so you weren't here 4 years ago, you weren't here 2 years ago, you weren't here post Supreme Court ruling last year, you weren't here in June, July, she went through every month. So here we are, it's May 2014, you've never put forward any plan, any idea, you've got nothing. So if not this, then what? So we'll see. We'll see. I think that it speaks to the strength of the public sector unions is he'll veto it because that's what the public sector unions want him to do. Well, depends how strong the conservative filibuster is at the time. Okay, so right now there's no money for Ram Stadium, right? So there's no state money for it. Sadly, the money that went into Ballpark Village, $19 million went into Ballpark Village of state money, but that money had been legislatively set aside years ago, so that authority for that money just stayed. Right now, the Rams, they'd be operating from scratch. They'd have to go down and they'd have to pass a law to get money for their stadium, and it just depends on how strong the filibuster is, because the majority of Republicans will be okay with it. They will try to figure out a way to make it happen. And if the conservatives are this year was an extraordinarily difficult year, in that the list of things that I would call fiscally moderate was long, and so we had to fight against so many different bad ideas. And at the end, like I said, we were able to negotiate to where it could have been worse. Part of the negotiation was lowering the sales tax, but there's a whole like I said, we didn't have any. There was no jobs bill. I hate that term, jobs bill. Government's going to target money to a specific area, and then we're going to create jobs, and that's all that we're missing right now is more targeted tax incentives. But anyway, so that's the answer. The answer will be, because the desire to do that will be immense. The pressure to do that will be immense, and then. I think you've got to, when you're deciding who to put into office, you got to look at people, if you have any evidence of this, do they propose difficult things? Like, are the laws that they introduce, are they challenging the status quo? Are they willing to take on the pressure, like by saying, I'm for this? I filed numerous pension reform bills, only to be completely destroyed by the unions. But I was willing, I filed one reform bill that said all pensions must be fully funded within 5 years. Sounds pretty reasonable, right? I had 29,000 retired teachers sign a petition telling me what to do with my proposal. So we need people that will actually file bills that will make people mad because they're good ideas. And then you have to look at not people who vote no, people who stop bad ideas. And particularly in the Senate, will you stop a bad idea? You know, because I will tell you that, you know, when you look at a bad idea and you look at the vote count, you know, half the people that are voting no would not stop the idea from coming forward. So in that specific thing, you're going to need 4 or 5 people that will say no and completely no. And otherwise, it'll happen. Well, first of all, I think you take comfort by the fact that we're ultimately going to win, because it works. And if you don't pursue the path that we've, you know, if you don't pursue that path, you're eventually going to go bankrupt. You're going to get in such a horrible situation that you're going to have to turn back to free market. But in the interim, it's going to be each and every one of us will find our own platform, our own way to put forward ideas that advance free market thinking. And in the political universe, it's I'm moving out to St. Charles County. I bought a farm in Augusta, and I'm going to move out there next year. And I'm really looking forward to getting to know the mayor of Augusta, and my Central Committee Republican person, and my county person. And I've already met my House rep, who's not particularly conservative. I told him he's got a year to clean up his act. And then Bob Onder would be my state senator. And you can have, if you're consistent in your communication with those elected officials, you have more sway over them than you think. I represent 175,000 people. I consistently hear from less than 100. And all of us listen to who we hear from. And I'll start out by saying that, you know, if Senator Bond had come to me or come to our leadership or come to anybody in the caucus to say, you know, this is what I'm thinking and this is the path that you might consider, I think that would have been particularly effective. But that didn't happen. Senator Bond signed on as a paid lobbyist with the Missouri Chamber. And once he signed on with the Missouri Chamber as a paid lobbyist, he became in favor of what their initiative was to expand Medicaid. I was shocked when that happened. That speaks a lot to what we talked about during the course of this day, this morning, is, you know, we need men and women there who believe what they believe, understand why they believe it, can explain why, and then pursue those things. And the argument can't change because an interest group thinks differently. And you'll listen to them, and they may come help you make your determination, but that was a really disheartening moment for me personally when that reality came. The fact of the matter is that it's multifaceted, the opposition to Medicaid expansion. The easy argument to make is the fiscal one, the financial one. It overwhelms the existing program as today, 850,000 Missourians out of 6 million, overwhelms our budget. As a cost, it has the highest rate of inflation of all of our costs. As far as our control over the program as it exists today, we control, you know, maybe 10% of the program. Every change you make to the program requires a federal waiver. The program as it exists today is not financially viable. So the idea that you would expand the program more fuller still, with this idea being that your cost at the end is only 10%, well, even if it stays 10%, it creates a tremendous financial burden, and there's no way in our opinion that it will stay 10%. You know, only 7 states have expanded Medicaid. 25 states have accepted the Medicaid expansion dollars, but those states already had fully expanded Medicaid. Their Medicaid programs existed the way they existed. And actually in some of the states, they rolled the program back because they only had to have it be up to 138% of poverty. So the fiscal argument can stop and start the entire argument. But I'll go further still. We had tremendous push by religious leaders, primarily African American. That's my church. Is actually an African American inner city church. I met with them. They're advocates for the expansion. And the argument I make to them is a bigger argument that asks us to reflect both on the history of the Medicaid program, which just celebrated its 50th year, as well as the history of the Moynihan Report, which will celebrate its 50th year this coming March, whereby in that report, as an Undersecretary of Labor, we learned that 28% of all African American children were born out of wedlock. And I look at the growth of the federal government and the growth of the entitlement programs. Entitlements not just for people, but for corporations too, quite frankly. We've had this huge dramatic increase in the government involving itself. And if you think about, I like to think of the things in terms of there's business, there's government, and there's the civil society. And the role that civil society played 50 years ago was far more pronounced. And government and business were much farther apart and separate. And what we've evolved to over the last 50 years is these two are intertwined, and the civil society has been diminished. And the whole idea is civil society would solve our problems, but now we let this partnership of big government and big business solve our problems. I had a nun in my office. She came to advocate and then pray with me that I would change my mind. And when we were praying, I said, well, sister, can we pray that we get back to 28% single parenthood in the African American community? And she said, that's never going to happen. I said, well, sister, where's your faith? You know? So my point, so a bigger philosophy is, you know, we have this huge tide of big government, and there's a handful of us that are standing in front of this huge tide trying to get to go back the other way. And if we're successful and we turn the tide, look, there are going to be people who are going to be exposed. There are going to be people that have become so reliant on government that if government starts pulling back, that it's going to be a challenge for them. So, I mean, it's fiscal, it's bigger picture, and there's actually a study that just came out this week that talked about it actually would create a disincentive for work, which that never became part of the debate. So, I mean, it's not hard to be against Medicaid expansion. It's hard to have people hear the reasons why you're against Medicaid expansion. So thanks for your question.
We could talk all morning and be riveted to our chairs, I'm sure, but we are out of time. Senator Lamping,
thank you all for having me.
Very much for your time.